This week we are covering the var data type and constant variables. And the var data type, because it is generic, it works really well with something called an array list. And this is similar to the list that we looked at last week when we talked about arrays. If you remember, a list is dynamic and it does not have a set length. And you can add items and you can remove items from the list. The array list works the same way. You can add and remove items. The array list also lets you add any data type. So you're not limited to all strings or all double or all integer. You can add a string to the array list. You can add a double number to the array list. You can add an integer. Okay? It lets you mix up the data types. And so it is kind of ideal to work with the var data type because the var data type is generic and the array list has all sorts of different data types. So they work really well together. So I am going to show you how an array list works, and it is very similar to a list. Okay. And then we're also going to talk about constant variables. So the var data type allows you to basically omit a specific data type. So instead of saying int or double or string, when you declare a variable, you can just use the keyword var. And then what C# does is it looks at what you're storing and it kind of figures out what the data type is. Okay, so when you use var, you have to initialize the variable when you declare it. So we can't just say var name semicolon. Okay, it'll give you an error. So you actually have to put a value in there because that's how C# knows what type of data is going to be stored, and that allows C# to reserve enough space in memory for it. And then we've got constant variables. And so a constant variable is something that does not change. You cannot change it while the program is running. It will not let you. So if you have a set value, then you can put const in front of it. And it is okay to use it with integers and floats, doubles, strings, character, bool, all of our regular data types. You cannot use it with var, and you cannot use it with static. So in my little example, pay rate is something that is not going to change. So when you declare something like that, you can put const in front of it. And then it's not supposed to change, and the program won't let it change. Okay, and so basically this little program just calculates gross pay. We've looked at similar ones before. The difference here is that now we've made the pay rate constant. And that brings us to array lists. So this is what is a little new. I already told you the unique thing about it is that you can add items of any data type. Okay, so that is the primary difference between an array list and a list. Okay, and so with the array list, that is part of system collections. Okay, so using system collections gives you access to all of the methods that are in the array list. And you will notice that the names of the methods are pretty much the same as the names of the methods in lists. Okay, it's the only difference here is that we're calling it an array list, and it accepts all the different data types. So to create one of these, we use ArrayList. We have our object that we create. In this case, I'm calling it account. And then we say new and ArrayList. And you'll notice that when we had the list, we did have to give it a data type, but with an array list, we don't, okay, because it accepts all of the data types. Okay, so declaring an array list is a little different than a list because we don't put the data type in there. We can initialize an array list pretty much the same way that we initialize the list. We have the curly braces, and then we can either give it values or variables. And again, these variables, you can see I've got a name, which would be string, and then I've got beginning balance, which would be probably double for the data type. And it will accept variables of any data type. We can also use the add method. So we take our array list object, which is account dot add, and then we put whatever variable or value we want to add in the parentheses. So add always adds to the end. Doesn't matter if it's a list or an array list, it's going to put it at the end. Insert allows you to add something to your list based on the index. So you can put the value anywhere you want. If you use an index of 0, it's going to put it at the beginning. Okay, so here is the array list example. In this case, I do have all text. Okay, and as far as determining how many there are, we use count, just like we did with a regular list. And then here we're adding one to the beginning. We can also add a range. And for an array list, the range that you add has to be in another array list. So you can see I have my initial list and then I have new members. They're both array lists. And then I can take members, which is my original one, dot add range, and I can add in the new members. Insert range is similar. Add range adds it to the end. Insert range, I can specify the location of, in the original list, in members, I can specify the location that I want the new list to go. So here I chose 0, so it's going to put it at the beginning. The count method retrieves how many items are in the array list, okay, just like it did for a regular list. And as far as looping, just like a regular list, we can use for, and we can also use for each loops. With a for loop, you do have to increment a counter, okay? Or you can look at it as an index. And so here I've set it to 0. I'm going to stay in the loop, basically as going to go through as many items as there is because I'm using members.count. And then I'm going to increase that index each time. And you can see I'm subscripting in to the array list and retrieving the values and printing them. For each is probably a better choice if you are going to process everything in the list. But little warning here, because you can have different data types, in a for each, normally you have to specify the data type. And here you have to use var, because you don't know what the data type is. Okay, so here you can see I've got an array list and I've got strings and I've got double values. So I can't say for each string, because when it hits one of these numbers, it's going to get a runtime error. I can use var, because remember, var is generic. And so that will work. So I can say var m in members, and I can write out m. And so it'll grab mini, write that out. It'll grab the 20, write that out. Okay, and that works in a for each. And that's the only way that you can code a for each with an array list. As far as removing items, this is identical to what we did with lists. We can use remove. And if we use remove, then we have to either give it the value that we want removed or the location. Okay, so we have to use that index and subscript in. Remove at, this is very specific with an index. Okay, so it's basically the list, array list object dot remove at, and then the location of the item we want removed. Remove range is similar because we have to use the index. With remove range, we give it the starting location, the index of the starting location, and then we indicate how many items we want removed. And then the clear method is exactly the same. If we use the array list object dot clear, we get rid of everything. Sorting does not work very well with an array list because we can have all these different data types. So you can only do a sort if the data types are the same. Okay, then it will work and it will sort in ascending order. Otherwise, if you have an array list and you're not sure if the data types are going to be the same, do not sort it, because you will get a runtime error. So I do have an example here where I've got an array list. Okay, and then we go through adding and removing and sorting, and then we print out our sorted list. We remove some more, and then we use for each to print out our list. You'll notice in the beginning here, we've got a for, then we do a for each. Then we clear the whole thing out and we create a little array list of new members and we add that into our list. We insert a couple more people and then we print out the membership and the dues information. Now you'll notice that I did not use a for each on this. And because I wanted the members printed with the dues, I pretty much had to use a for loop here. And it works pretty good subscripting in to the array list object. Okay, so I represents the name, I plus 1 is the dues. And then you'll notice each time I go through, I'm incrementing by 2. So the first time it's going to grab Minnie, and then it'll grab her dues. And then it increments I by 2. So it's going to grab Mickey and his dues, increments I by 2, grabs Donald and his dues, and so on. Now, if I just want to access everything in the list and maybe print it out on a single line, then I can do a for each. Okay, and you'll notice I used right instead of right line, and I've got a space in here. And so here is, what this looks like. So it started out with just text. Okay, and then I added the new items with the names and the dues and printed them 2 different ways. Okay, and here's just another little example of an array list. And this has the account name and then a starting balance. Then we basically add in a bunch of checks. And while we're adding in the checks, we are subtracting from the balance to give us an ending balance. And we add in that ending balance. Okay, and then we can print everything out. So as you can see, I declared the beginning balance, which I retrieved. I set the beginning balance to the ending balance. Okay, and up here I've got the name. So I added the name and the beginning balance, ask them about how many checks they want, get into this little loop, have them enter the check amount, which I store here, subtract that from ending balance, and then I add it to the array list. Okay, so I just stay in here while they're entering checks. When they're done, I now have a new ending balance, so I add that, and then I get into printing. So to print the account name, I know it's first, so I just subscript into account. And then I'm going to print out the beginning balance because I know that comes next. Okay, and I'm using string format for this. And then I'm looping through everything else except for the very last item in the list. The last item in the list is my ending balance. Okay, so I'm starting it at 2 because I want to skip over the account and the beginning balance. And then I'm ending it before the last one. And so that gives me all of my checks. So I'm just basically printing out all the check amounts. Okay? And then once that's done, I'm going to print my ending balance. Okay, so here's just an example of how it looked when it ran. So you can see it does print out the ending balance in the beginning and each check amount. Okay, so that is what we're covering this week. Okay, so I think the array list is kind of a nice little review of lists in general. And then we've got a new data type there and learned how to make things constant.